Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Mikkipedia, and this week on the podcast, I speak to Marty Kendall, creator of the Nutrient Optimiser and data-driven fasting, programs he has created to help thousands of people navigate their way to better health through food. We discuss the impact that dietary fat has on insulin, the nutrients that certain dietary patterns fall short on, i.e. the carnivore diet or a vegan diet, protein-sparing modified fasts, which obviously both Marty and I are big fans of, and how his program, Data-Driven Fasting, allows people to use their own data through the use of continuous glucose monitors and measuring your glucose levels to determine fasting and eating windows and food intake that suits you. So, Marty Kendall is an engineer who seeks to optimize nutrition using a data-driven approach. Marty's interest in nutrition began 18 years ago to help his wife Monica better control her type 1 diabetes, and we discussed that a little bit in today's interview. Since then, he has developed a systemized approach to nutrition tailored for a wide range of goals, contexts and preferences. And over the past 5 years, Marty has shared his research over at optimizingnutrition.com. He has developed Nutrient Optimiser and Data-Driven Fasting, both tools to guide thousands of people on their journey towards nutritional optimization. And Marty can be found at optimizingnutrition.com, and there is a link to this in the show notes. Before we crack on into the interview though, I would just like to remind you that the best way to support the podcast is to hit subscribe button on the platform you listen to your podcasts on. This increases the exposure that Mikkipedia has out there amongst the thousands of other podcasts that are released weekly. The more exposure we get, the more opportunity people get to benefit from information that my guests share with us. All right team, please enjoy the interview that I had with Marty Kendall. From every academic sort of institute. But regardless, I think it's great that they're looking at your data and your information of sort of real life, putting into practice, not those low carb techniques, but more about actual food quality, because it is just, I think it's missed even by, the important stuff seems to be missed by academic institutes a lot of the time.
Yeah, I'm just so passionate about food quality and quantifying food quality, and it's like, what do you need? Nutrients from food. It's like, who disagrees with that? Hopefully nobody, but nobody seems to focus on it, and we can quantify it. So it all just makes so much damn sense to me. And Marty,
I agree. And you're very, from, as I understand, quite diet agnostic. So actually, can we kick off, and we'll kick off the interview, with you letting listeners know a little bit of your background, because obviously, well, obvious to me, because I know a little bit about you, you haven't come down that traditional sort of route of studying nutritional sciences, but it was more your wife's type 1 diabetes that got you interested.
Yeah. 20 years ago, I married Monica, who happens to have type 1 diabetes. Neither of us really understood much about nutrition or diet or how food influenced insulin. And then she said, why don't we start thinking about having kids? And I was like, okay, cool, let's have a look at that. And then her sister, who was a doctor, said, hey, you really need to get your blood sugars under control and your diabetes under control, because that's really important. And then you start looking into the long list of complications of diabetic pregnancy, and they're pretty scary. So that's incredibly motivating. And we were lucky enough to find a doctor at that time who was able to give us information on the link between, carb dosing for the amount of insulin you need, which was, it was amazing that even back then it was unknown for her, because she'd had such a poor education about how to use insulin to dose for carbs, and we haven't come a lot further since then, but that really helped us dive into how to manage carbohydrate with insulin. And I suppose it wasn't until 10 years after that, 10 years ago, I stumbled across Rob Wolf, and then Jason Fung sort of directed me to look at some stuff on the Food Insulin Index, which I was able to download the data and sort of analyze it to understand what foods raise insulin, and that helped me quantify foods to optimize insulin dosing for Moni. So the thing about type 1 is you just don't want to be dosing massive industrial amounts of insulin every meal. You're just on this massive roller coaster, which is really hard to manage. So quantifying the insulin requirement for food based on not just carbs, but fiber and protein and fat was really fascinating, really helpful for her. And that really took off in the keto sphere, because keto was starting to trend really hard at that point in time. So started a blog, and that blew up. And it's just been a continual journey from there to understand not just for type 1 diabetes management, but what different people need from their food. It's not just insulin management, and it's not just insulin with food, and it's much more than that, beyond just the insulin keto minimizing carbohydrate aspect, which I'm sure we'll dive into more today.
Yeah, Marty, that's interesting that you talk about something called the Food Insulin Index, and that you sort of did a deep dive into it, because of course this is not something I hear a lot of people talk about, even those people who do have type 1 diabetes or work with people with type 1 diabetes. And I think it wasn't until I had an interview with Andrew Kutnick.
Oh yeah, he's amazing.
He is, right?
Smart guy, really strong.
Yeah.
Arnie Dykman said he was the strongest guy he'd ever met in person. He's a really nice guy and incredibly smart and generous.
Yeah, he totally is. And then he was just talking about the complexities of how insulin in the body responds to not just, or how your blood sugars respond to not just insulin, but of course stress and activity, and that very much give one dose for this particular carbohydrate in food completely misses the point. And how is it that even like in 2022, this is still that sort of like prevailing advice that people get?
I suppose a lot of my motivation is just being angry at the poor advice that people like my wife get. And I imagine the quality of life she could have had if her mum had known what we know now when she was diagnosed at 10. And ironically, our 16-year-old son was diagnosed with type 1 in December. So he's thriving. He's preparing for a year after diagnosis. He's wanting to set a world deadlift record for under 16 on the 10th of December. So, it's just a different world with the right information, and type 1 can nearly be a superpower in some ways to help people, partly because it helps them focus on the quality of their diet and take it really seriously. But on the Food Insulin Index, basically carbs will raise insulin the most, fiber will have less of an effect, protein has a longer insulin response, and fat has a much longer insulin response. But I suppose going forward, I realized that it's not just the insulin response to our food. Our body produces insulin to keep it from disintegrating fundamentally. Like if a type 1 diabetic doesn't take their basal insulin, all their stored energy just disintegrates into the bloodstream, and on a low-carb diet, 80% of your insulin is just to stop your body from disintegrating. So for weight loss, for everybody else who's not injecting insulin, the priority needs to be for satiety and optimizing your diet to improve satiety so you get the nutrients you need, the protein you need, are able to manage your appetite, and then reduce your body fat. So you need less basal insulin, and that's another thing I get annoyed with in everybody talking about insulin and insulin resistance at the moment. There's no focus on what's the root cause of insulin resistance. It's energy toxicity and optimizing your diet to optimize body composition, basically, that enables you to improve your basal insulin requirements. So that's my other rant for the moment. I got it out of my system.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And I do find it, I like how you talk about what impacts on insulin because, of course, there was, or blood sugar as well. Like when you're talking about that, I'm thinking about the glycemic index, which, of course, was very hot in the 90s and early 2000s. And I was part of the cohort of postgraduate students.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, trying to earn my keep at
By being a guinea pig in the lab.
And I mean, it was fraught with like just limitations. Like we didn't really follow rules and we were like nutrition students, but regardless, it's, food tends to be still talked about in health professional circles by virtue of the glycemic index, or at least carbohydrate is. Whereas now we know so much more about that individual variation in addition to that food matrix that you're sort of alluding to. Like it just surprises me how long these things seem to take to sort of pervade those academic circles, I suppose.
Yeah. I was talking to Amy Rush at Low Carb Down Under and a few other people about just how challenging the dietary guidelines. It's just not something you're allowed to do as a nutritionist. It's not part of your scope. This is the gospel and thou shalt follow it. And going even further back in my history, I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist until I was 10. So that's the hub, the epicenter of nutritional belief, and they have some very strong beliefs around food, and they're trying to bring Jesus back to earth sooner by converting everybody to a plant-based diet, and that belief is even stronger than financial conflict of interest, and that's been very powerful. So there's a lot of entrenched dogma, and as an engineer, I'm very, I believe data, and I'm very, very skeptical of any named diet or belief system, or just, we get groupthink and we develop these really strong communities around nutrition and what we eat, and it just limits what we can do and how we can optimize it for different people and different goals, because one size doesn't fit all. Plant-based doesn't work for everybody. Keto doesn't work for everybody. What does keto mean anyway, really? It just means so many things to so many different people that it's a nebulous, non-meaningful term anymore. So if you can just quantify it a little bit, you can fine-tune it for different people with different goals.
Completely. And that sort of leads to, well, first of all, I think as an engineer, you have the advantage of not having that sort of prior learning through that university system.
Being trained in the system.
Exactly. It's so, like, people are like, oh my God, but I grew up thinking that, margarine was better for you. And I'm like, well, imagine sitting in a university lecture hall being, told that. So it's, that it takes.
Yeah, and you lose your license if you don't preach the gospel. So,
certainly for some people, that's so true.
I just need it to work for my wife and my son, and I can see instant feedback on their glucose and insulin and body weight, exactly what those foods do. I've got I can see under the cover of how metabolism works, which I find incredibly fascinating as an engineer.
Oh, I completely understand. So, and you're very focused, as you said, on food quality, and you've developed a number of tools that people can use, like your masterclasses and your programs. Yep. Marty, can you sort of talk us through, from your Optimising sort of nutrition group of programs or suite of programs, like what kind of process does someone, if they're interested in figuring out the diet for them, what process would they go through?
Yeah, we've got 3 different programs, just to give a high-level overview. One is a macros masterclass, one is a micros masterclass, and another is data-driven fasting, which is just for people who don't want to track their food. They can just use their glucose as a fuel gauge to guide what and when they eat. But the most important thing is really to work out, what are you doing now, and how can you tweak that towards optimal. We know where optimal is from a lot of data analysis, but like things like a protein sparing modified fast and dialing your protein percentage up to 60 or 70%, or dialing in your micronutrients to have a really high diet quality score, that's optimal. But it's a really sharp, shiny tool, and people who jump from zero to hero overnight, like everybody's prone to do, they go, oh, it's January 1, I'm going to lose weight because I gained so much weight over Christmas. I'm just going to jump in and, be a diet hero. And as an engineer, somehow I spend all my time counseling people to chill out and develop progressive habits that lead to sustainable success. So it's like, yeah, increasing your protein percentage, increasing your nutrient density will improve your satiety, enable you to lose weight quicker. But if you dial it up so much that you fall off the wagon and you are really, really hungry, because even though protein is the most satiating macronutrient per calorie, your body still needs some energy from the food you're eating, because you can't release all your stored energy overnight. You'll still be hungry. You need to work out where you are now. So we get people to track their food for a week and then progressively tweak it by saying how much protein you're getting now. How can we dial back the fat and carbs a little bit while still prioritizing protein? That's the macros masterclass. And then in the micros masterclass, it's a similar process of tracking your current diet, and then asking which micronutrients are you currently missing. Let's dial in foods that contain more of the minerals that your diet is missing. Then let's get the vitamins your diet is currently missing, and then let's try to optimize the overall diet quality. But you don't need to go from a diet quality score of 50 to 100. It's like going from 40 to 60 or 40 to 50 over 4 weeks is a really great win that gets people a long way down the track. They form new habits around food. They can lose weight at 0.5 to 1% per week by dialing in the diet quality without falling off the wagon. So yeah, that's my thing with optimizing. It's not about going to 100% overnight. It's not foot to the floor. It's let's progressively improve your diet in a way that improves your habits, develops new habits that you enjoy. You love this food. You've morphed your baseline diet and tweaked it just a little bit to improve it enough to make progress, but not so much to go, I hate this food at the end of 4 weeks, and just go back to the Maccas and Pringles you're really craving. Once you get the nutrients your body needs, you lose interest in those foods. But if you push it too hard, you fall off the wagon.
Yeah, interesting you say that, because I feel like for most people, so when people come to me for their individual goals, a lot of the time they actually want to do that 0 to 100 approach, because they're in for the quick wins and the
Everybody does.
Yeah. And so it can be, and actually some people's personalities, I think, are really suited to it. But when you've got a group of people sort of coming together, I totally agree with that sort of progressive approach and talking to them about the benefit of the small change, because they will notice it. They just won't get that massive, accelerated weight loss, if you like, at the get-go.
Yeah. And accelerated weight loss is great, but most people find they get really hungry eventually. And yeah, we like I said, we've designed the sharp, shiny tool that will get you to optimal, but your amygdala, your instincts, your survival instincts, your cravings, your habits don't understand that yet. So yeah, maybe 2% of people can jump into a micros masterclass and just completely overhaul their diet. They're really data driven and love all the numbers and just treat it like a massive Sudoku puzzle and solve it overnight. Like that's like your brain is different. That 90% of people just need to go, okay, I'm going to try something a little bit more adventurous this week. And as they do that and give their body the nutrients and protein it needs, they stop craving the garbage food and they go, okay, that wasn't too bad. I tried that meal and I'm going to try another one that's a little bit more hardcore and just continue to level up. And yeah, 0.5 to 1% per week is heroic and fantastic. And you like the people who get, some people can get 2% a week weight loss, which is fantastic, but not all those people are able to land easily and not rebound. So yeah, that's where I really care about people developing lifelong habits, that in 6 months they've found their new routine that they can stick with, and it's changed their lives in a way that will continue with them for the long term.
Yeah, nice. And I know that you're a fan of the protein leverage theory, and as am I, the idea that, you know, protein is is one of the major things that we will continue to eat food until we meet our protein requirements. What kind of protein amounts are you seeing with all of your data? Because, well, that's the other thing as well, is you've now got thousands of data points with which you can sort of draw on to sort of give you some sort of insight. So what are some insights?
Yeah, we've got 140,000 days of data from 40,000 people that have used Nutrient Optimizer over 5 years.
Wow.
So it's just a massive data set that I can keep on mining and answering all those questions that you argue on Facebook all the time, but when you dive into the data, you can answer them for realsies. The average protein, like there was a study that Rubbenheimer and Simpson just released that showed that the average Aussie protein intake is about 18.3. The data from the US might be 12 to 15% protein. And we guide people to progressively increase their protein intake. So they find what they're doing initially. Low carbers might be 20, 25, 30%. And as they work up to 40%, they tend to get really nice results in terms of weight loss. So that's a matter of dialing back fat and carbs. 50, 60% protein is rare, and that people are able to stick to that in the data. So from a practical point of view, we just say let's progressively dial up that protein percentage across the week to 40% as a goal. If you get to 50 and you're not, chowing down on the donuts and peanut butter a couple of nights a week, then that's 50 is great. But 30 is amazing for people who have started at 15. So yeah, it's a matter of let's nudge it up a little bit. And Rubbenheimer and Simpson's work shows that if the population nudged their protein percentage up by 2-5%, it'd make a massive difference in how much everybody ate.
Yeah, interesting. And it's what people I work with, they seem to struggle initially with getting the protein without the fat. And then, of course, so this is where my initial interest in nutrition probably lay with like Bill Phillips and the Body for Life and the physique sort of world. I was never involved in it, but just, happy to digest the information. But so this is when you sort of bring in the light cottage cheese and the egg whites and foods which actually have sort of gone out of vogue because the fat's not in it. Like I definitely notice a real pushback whenever I mention something like low-fat yogurt. I get a little bit of a
people get triggered by that idea, don't they?
Yeah. What's your experience with that? Like, are you similarly find the same?
Oh yeah. I feel like our classes are a keto rehab detox sort of zone that, people have gone through keto and we believed, fat doesn't spike insulin and so fat's effectively a free food and, so people are just chowing down this unlimited fat and, I had a D&M with Steve Finney about eating fat to satiety, but, fat as a macronutrient is the least satiating nutrient per calorie. You'll still consume some fat, and fat's a fantastic source of energy, but it comes with protein. So most people, you can't just go, I'm just going to double down on the bacon, butter, and nuts to get my protein because you'll eat so many calories. Calories are unfortunately a thing. Energy balance is still a thing, but dialing in your macros provides satiety that enables you to eat less over the day. So yeah, people need to go, okay, a few days of tracking works magic. And then you go, okay, I'm getting a lot less protein than I thought. And oh my gosh, look at all the fat I'm getting from my dressings and nuts and all these things. And then it's a matter of, let's dial back the added fat. You don't need the butter and bulletproof coffee if you're trying to lose body fat. Let's dial back the nuts because they're just incredibly easy to overeat. And then to really dial it down, it's like, okay, let's have a egg white omelette with some whole eggs and some egg whites. So that's those sort of substitutions. But if you just go from a 10% therapeutic keto diet, because people thought keto was magic, and if I get my ketones high enough, it'll be the body fat I'm burning, not the dietary fat I'm burning. I don't know how so many of us thought that. I know I did for a while. Let's if you go from that 10% protein extreme to 60% by eating egg white and chicken breast and broccoli. People just won't make that transition easily. So it's a matter of, okay, let's look at my current diet, make those substitutions progressively. I'll get sustainable progress, and I can keep dialing it up if I want to. But if I'm making great progress and enjoying the food, no need to go more hardcore than that.
Yeah, no, I like it. And there are a number of things I want to pick up on. First, I'll tell you a story about our great mate, Professor Grant Schofield, who, when we discovered, he's great. When we discovered keto, I remember walking into his office and he was drinking like cream with whey protein. And that's all he drank throughout the day. And he's like, but it doesn't spike my insulin. I'm good. It's fat.
At least he got the whey protein.
No, it's true. But actually, on that though, you've mentioned a couple of times now about the insulin, about fat's effect on insulin. And I feel like this is something that people aren't aware of. Can you sort of describe how fat does impact on insulin, Marty?
Yeah, it's complex, and because we don't see it on our CGMs, we think fat's a free food. But carbs will spike your insulin or come back straight down. So the area under the curve is it's abrupt, but it's sort of small. Protein doesn't really affect blood sugars that much. It may be up or down depending on if you're insulin resistant or not, and how much gluconeogenesis is happening. If you're type 2 diabetic and you've got some level of insulin resistance, it's actually better to prioritize the protein to improve your insulin resistance and lose body fat. But in terms of fat will digest over a longer period of time, maybe 5 to 8 hours, and therefore we see in my wife and son's CGM and in our data-driven fasting challenge that the fat will stop your blood glucose from returning below normal to the point that you're dipping into your stored energy for longer. So if you have a lower carb, lower fat food, your blood sugar will drop below what's normal for you. You'll be below your trigger that we call it in DDF sooner, and you can eat again sooner because you're tapping into your stored energy. But really the big factor of fat is that it's easily stored, so it doesn't require a lot of insulin to store. Your body just says, welcome aboard. Whereas with carbohydrate, your body says, well, we can only, hold so much of that in our blood and our glycogen in our liver and our muscles. So we just need to hold all the stored energy back in our body now, just until we burn off the carbohydrate. But with fat, it just says, welcome aboard. We love fat. We need plenty of fat to store. We've got heaps of room for that. But then as the stored energy on your body increases more and more and more, you need more insulin to stop your body disintegrating. So a type 1 diabetic will be taking more and more basal insulin. And someone who's not injecting insulin, their pancreas will be working 24/7, whether they're eating or not, to have a higher basal insulin, a higher fasting insulin level that will stop their body from disintegrating. So the real root cause of insulin resistance is energy toxicity. It's having too much energy in your body that you need more insulin. Your pancreas is working overtime more and more and more to stop your body from disintegrating into your bloodstream. So the shift for me was seeing insulin as a anti-catabolic hormone that stops your body from breaking down like an uncontrolled type 1 diabetic, rather than an anabolic hormone that you see bodybuilders injecting insulin to grow bigger muscles. But really what that's doing is stopping the muscles breaking down. It's not as much building their muscles and forcing energy into the cells, it's stopping it breaking down. So once you see insulin as an anti-catabolic hormone, you go, oh yeah, it's just the brake for my metabolism that stops the energy flowing into my bloodstream.
Interesting. So if someone is on a keto approach and they're measuring their blood sugar, if they have, so their blood sugars could actually still be elevated, I've seen this actually, elevated blood sugars due to not the carbohydrate, but actually the fat content in their diet.
Yeah. And really the concept of oxidative priority is really fascinating as well. Really, your body has to burn off the glucose first and then the fat. You're always burning fat and carbs, but if you've got a lot of fat in your body and a lot of carbs, the body will be prioritizing burning the carbohydrate first as a priority. But if you've got a lot of fat in your body or in your diet, the glucose sort of gets stacked up in your body to the point that it has to focus on burning the carbohydrate first. So if you've got a lot of fuels in your body, you'll still see high glucose, and your body's producing glucose through gluconeogenesis from your protein, and really a high average blood sugar is just an indication, again, of energy toxicity, which is an indication you'll have high basal insulin because you've got a lot of fuel stored in your body. So the way to bring everything down, your insulin and your blood sugars, the overall average across the day, is to drop your overall body fat levels by prioritizing satiety, not just managing the little blips in the first 2 hours after you eat on your CGM.
Yeah, interesting. And I wonder whether that's the premise for Richard Bernstein's approach, because he is low carb, but he's certainly not high fat.
Oh, yeah. Dr. B is, he's never been wrong, basically.
No.
He's incredibly smart through all the fads and misinformation. You go back to Bernstein and he's always spot on, and he's a protein-focused, use fat as a lever. If you need more energy, fat's a great source for people with diabetes. But if you need to dial back body fat, then you need to dial back dietary fat a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not a zero-fat diet, but...
It's interesting what you say about satiety and fat, because, of course, a lot of the language around fat when the low-carb, high-fat diet came out was that it's so satisfying and you just eat very little. But actually, in my clinical experience, I feel like men actually are more satisfied by fat than women appear to be.
Really?
I've always pushed protein up for women and been less... I've noticed less that fat, that men would overeat fat necessarily. And I don't know whether anything in your data has any sort of sex difference anywhere, and maybe not even there, but anywhere.
Yeah, really the major thing is that men tend to carry more muscle, and muscle is the major driver of your basal metabolic rate. So you'll be using more energy if you've got more muscle mass. So your BMR is going to be a lot higher if you're carrying a lot more muscle, and maybe men can tolerate the extra energy from fat a little bit more.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
Yeah, interesting. But and like the fat bombs and everything we make to give ourselves comfort when we reduce carbs and believe that fat is a free food, it's a bit of a trap. So yeah, again, it's not that fat is a bad source of energy, but just if you want to reduce the energy on your body, you need to prioritize the nutrients your body needs. And then your body says, oh, I've got everything I need and a whole lot of stored energy. Why do I need to keep on eating? Because I've got all the nutrients I need. And your appetite settles down, and that's where the magic happens, is the big finding from the data analysis.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of it can be behavior driven as well. And I'm just thinking about the woman who moved from a low fat to a high fat diet, and suddenly the carrots at afternoon tea turn to those fat bombs. Yeah. And then suddenly peanut butter is back on the menu. And
peanut butter. I used to, cream and peanut butter and yogurt, and I still struggle with the peanut butter. But I'd be going, if I need to get my ketones up, I'll just eat the peanut butter. So yummy. I love this keto diet and getting my ketones up, but I don't look so good. Wait up.
What's going on?
Let me think a bit more.
Yeah.
Let me think a bit more. Maybe just chasing elevated ketones wasn't the only goal, if that was coming from dietary fat. But and that's I suppose how I transitioned to go, let's look at what actually helps with satiety, because not everybody's a type 1 diabetic that needs to stabilize their insulin and blood sugars as their primary goal. I think 95% of people are interested in keto, want body composition and weight loss, and that's where you look to the bodybuilding community, who Eric Helms and whoever else, they get adequate protein without excess energy, and then it turns out to be adequate nutrients without excess energy. It's not just protein.
Yeah. Marty, with your data sets, obviously you're diet agnostic, but very few people actually are. Like when you look at when you look at, say, paleo and keto, which nutrients across your data set might they struggle to sort of meet micronutrient wise? Because we often relate micronutrient deficiencies to people who follow a plant-based approach, but I imagine there are some issues in that keto paleo space as well.
Yeah, definitely. With 140,000 days of data, I've run the multivariate regression analysis through it, and the biggest cravings in that for our data set, which the average is a 16% carbohydrate, 30% protein diet. So it's a fairly low carb, paleo-ish, wouldn't say keto depending on what your definition of keto is, because keto isn't usually 30% protein. It's usually a bit lower, but the biggest factors that drive satiety in that data set are, protein percentage, potassium, calcium, sodium, and then other vitamins and minerals sort of pop up and play a role occasionally. So potassium is the non-starchy green veggies that people seem to crave as well. It's not just the protein that people crave. So some people on paleo keto are getting their serve of non-starchy veggies, but not everybody is. So.
I find that really surprising, that potassium craving, because I saw that you wrote about that, and people often justify eating chocolate because of magnesium. And I haven't actually ever seen that really backed up anywhere in science. But I'd never actually heard that potassium was potentially a nutrient that might be leveraged a little bit the way that protein might be. Is that how you view it?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to view it. You can either say we actually have distinct cravings for these nutrients, or foods that contain more potassium and calcium and sodium and a whole array of essential nutrients per calorie, contain more of those nutrients per calorie, are more satiating and harder to overeat. So, or I suppose what we're trying to do is say these are the people that thrive and eat less, and these are the people who eat more and overeat and are obese, and what are the characteristics of their diet. We definitely seem to have sodium cravings, and potassium is also important in our body. And like some people say that in days gone by, sodium was really hard to get and potassium was in everything. So we've developed distinct conscious cravings for sodium, but maybe we don't have the same taste for potassium, but maybe we still crave that. But yeah, I suppose we're trying to quantify diets and characteristics of diets that align with lower overall calorie intake, which is, but it's basically overall nutrient density and getting enough of the nutrients that your diet is not currently providing.
And of course, your plant-based peeps, I mean, iron, B12 and zinc are three that I think
omega-3 bioavailable protein.
What about things like the creatine and carnitine and cholesterol?
That all definitely come with the red meat. Interestingly, cholesterol, I've been diving into that a lot lately. If you look at cholesterol, it seems to have a separate, distinct satiety response to cholesterol that's positive. So people who eat more cholesterol tend to eat less, and it's like, okay, you've got protein leverage, but once you start to factor in minerals, protein, some of the satiety response to protein is redistributed to the minerals. And then once you consider cholesterol, protein leverage comes down more. So it seems it's not just protein leverage, but rather nutrient leverage, that your body craves the nutrients that you need more of right now. So on an omnivorous diet, A and B12 and even protein are sometimes quite easy to get, but it's the harder to find nutrients in your current diet. And people eat different keto diets or paleo diets or plant-based diets. Everybody's diet is unique, and that's where in the Micros Masterclass, tracking your current diet and working out what the gaps are and filling those in with food is sort of the ultimate level of optimization of your diet.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I wonder cholesterol is is essential, right? Well, it's essential for the body, although we produce like 80%. Yeah. But it is required for our immune system and hormones and things like that, right?
Yeah, totally. And it makes sense that your body might crave it a little bit to supplement the cholesterol you need. And people with high cholesterol, it's typically a energy toxicity issue. That it's not just cholesterol in your bloodstream. You've got all the excess fat in your bloodstream and glucose, and it's when you get the high LDL and glucose at the same time, you get oxidized LDL. So again, it comes back to avoiding foods through a combination of fat and carbs together, which is the basic formula for modern processed junk food. And you don't want high levels of carbs and fat in your food or glucose and fat in your blood. And it's just an unnatural combination that wouldn't have naturally happened before the creation of modern processed foods. We would have had, potentially carbs in summer and fat in winter, but not sugar, starch, and seed oils continually available around the clock, 24/7, 365 days a year.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned seed oils. I'm interested to know your perspective on them, because I've, of course, came at this from the Mark Sisson, Rob Wolf, circa 2009. They're the devil. I do believe that those guys have moved on, actually, since that. So what's your take on seed oils, Marty? Or is it too contentious?
No. Happy to dive in. My take is really quite simple. If you look at the 1977 dietary goals for Americans, they sort of said cholesterol's bad, fat's bad, but unsaturated fat is not bad. So it basically gave a free pass to carbohydrate and monounsaturated fat. And that was really convenient because the whole food system was starting to shift towards seed oils, plant-based oils. From the 1950s, you see cholesterol starts to drop. But back from 1910, when they started to increase monocrop agriculture and extract polyunsaturated fats from seeds, the amount of seed oil we've been intaking from 1910 has just continued to climb over the last 100 years, and it's gone up by 800 calories per person per day in the US food system. It's obscene, the amount of total fat. So that's total fat. I think monounsaturated fat is the majority of that, and polyunsaturated fat has jumped up a fair bit. And if you look at rapeseed oil and palm oil and all these sorts of things, it's not people eating a lovely Mediterranean diet, sprinkling a bit of olive oil on their salads with their sardines or salmon on the side. It's just, ultra-processed food has just gone from in 1999, Splenda was approved, and food manufacturers were able to move from high fructose corn syrup, which is sort of falling out of favour. Food manufacturers went, beauty, I'll just, switch the high fructose corn syrup for industrial seed oils, put some flavours and colours, and, arguably, high fructose corn syrup's not great, but arguably the monounsaturated fat, I think, is even more bioavailable, low dietary induced thermogenesis energy source that's just going to go straight into our body. So if our total intake of fat has increased by 800 calories per person per day over the last 100 years, you don't need a conspiracy theory about they create greater oxidization or they're metabolized different or PUFAs are different. It's just we're eating so much more of them in ultra-processed food that's got sugars, starch, seed oils, flavors, colors, and a few synthetic crappy vitamins thrown in to make the package look better.
That is a very sensible sort of explanation for the problem with industrial seed oils, I think, because you're right, you don't have to necessarily, it's not anything really about inflammation other than the inflammation that might occur from energy toxicity because we're eating too much.
Totally.
Yep.
Totally. Yeah. And energy toxicity will create inflammation, full stop. You don't need another more complex mechanism that, I think you may win and you may lose that argument. I don't have the biochem chops to argue on that level. But if you say we're just eating a lot and a processed food, pick up an Oreo cookie or a Dorito or any other packaged food with a label and a barcode in the centre aisles of your supermarket, it's the same formula: sugar, flour, seed oil, colours, flavourings, and fortification. It's the same food, formula, and it's super cheap because we've just dumped fossil fuel fertilizer made from non-renewable methane gas into our food system to grow food quicker with more yield but less nutrition.
Yeah, so interesting. Marty, changing tacks a little bit because I like to do that, and we're about a third of the way through my questions, so we're not going to make it through. That's fine.
We can do a part two.
So today I got an article through my Eating Well subscription because they do have some great recipes, and it said that Weight Watchers has relaunched yet another version of their program. And this time...
Last one didn't work?
I think that there are just multiple iterations, but it's called an evolution, Marty. I mean, we've changed. They've changed.
Good on them.
Except they start doing things like making certain foods free foods, of which you can eat as much of this food as you like without having to count it. And it's surprising to me, because I just happened to be reading it because I was mildly curious, that potato is considered a free food. Now... I am familiar with something called the satiety index that did show that I think it was a boiled potato was the most, I can't remember, they called it most satisfying or satiating food. And you'll need to explain the difference for us, please, of satiety and satiation. But what's up with potatoes, and what actually, I mean, you've mentioned protein, but are there some surprising satisfying foods that create satiety that you've found?
Yeah, the 1997 University of Sydney Satiety Index was fascinating work. It looked at 38 data points. I think you were probably part of the guinea pig cohort in New Zealand that sort of continued that work with the glycemic index, and it was all part of the same movement. It was really fascinating and great work for the time, but I looked at that and went 38 data points, 38 different foods. Half of them are owned by Kellogg's, who sponsored the study.
Oh, interesting.
Kellogg's, SDA, don't need to bring in too many conspiracy theories, but
that's not even a conspiracy theory, isn't that just?
Yeah, it's just historical truth, which is completely fascinating. And people who think it's a conspiracy, I grew up in the SDA church, and everything Belinda Fetke bangs on about is reality and my youth. So, but the potato is fascinating. It was a cooked and cooled potato, so you've got resistant starch, which may be interesting. And the potato will spike your glucose and insulin over the short term. And then a couple of hours later, they tested how much people ate at the next meal a couple of hours later, and people ate less after the cooked and cooled potato, which is fairly bland. If you're not adding oil and salt, it's going to be I can't eat too much of that food, and I'm going to be fairly full. Things like the fast-acting carbs will boost your glucose and your insulin, and like I mentioned before, your body will say, hey, I've got heaps of energy in my bloodstream. I really need to burn off this carbohydrate really quickly. So I'm going to raise insulin and stop the release of stored energy, or slow the release of stored energy from my body. So you're going to be satiated in the short term. You're going to get a short-term satiety response. But what happens, 10, 12, 24 hours later after that, are you still going to be satiated? What usually happens is 2 or 3 hours later, your blood sugar crashes, your blood sugar's lower than normal, and then you're fanging for chips, potatoes, whatever else to bring your blood sugar back up. So that's where people on a low-fat, high-carb diet tend to be eating all the time, because they need to be topping up all the time. Our data looks at daily intake across the day. So it's daily calorie intake for people measuring their daily diet again and again and again. So we can get a really nice look at what happens across the day, not just over the short term. So in that respect, it's protein, fiber, potassium, calcium, sodium, and all the other nutrients seem to play a sort of a role under those main nutrients. So long-term satiety, feeling satiated across the day is more a factor of nutrient density, whereas short-term satiety is how much did you fill your stomach up. So stuff they can't eat anymore. I physically can't fit any more food in, but there's no guarantee that you're not going to be face down in donuts and peanut butter 5 hours later because you're starving hungry. So I think when I really want to turn the conversation about satiety to long-term satiety, what enables you to eat less across the whole day, not just the next meal in a laboratory experiment.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Marty, if I'm thinking about fat loss with that, I wonder have you analysed the data? And look, I know everyone is different, but an average sort of calorie intake for someone who is losing weight, do you have like data like that? Like you'll know that 35-year-old men can lose weight on X number of calories. Have you looked at that?
Yeah, we generally have, like most diet programs probably, other than yours, who is Ironman triathletes, most people are sort of at middle-aged menopausal female, and they tend to be losing weight on the 1,500 calories a day-ish on average, depending on how much muscle mass they're holding. So the more muscle mass, the more calories they burn. So that's where it's really important to have some resistance training, have some exercise, and eat the protein to build the lean mass to build that metabolic engine that actually burns the energy. Because if you lose your metabolic engine, you just have to drop your calories more and more and more and more. And, you're just going to be cold, miserable, and really hungry, and that doesn't last for too long.
No, yes, I totally agree. And actually, only about 30% of my people are Ironman triathletes. I've got a lot of those middle-aged menopausal women. That will probably be true. But what I find interesting in the whole discussion around calories is there's a real pushback against low-calorie diets as well. Like, no, you shouldn't have to sort of eat only 1,300 calories a day. You should be able to eat more, and and the rhetoric that sort of goes with that. Whereas in my experience, there are just some people who need 1,300 calories actually, and that's what it takes for them to lose weight. And of course, it depends on how much weight they've got to lose as well. And
and if you're a moderately sedentary middle-aged female who's losing muscle mass, then it's a different game to your Ironman triathlete. They might be able to pound through 5,000 calories a day and maintain a six-pack, but it's just completely different. And did you see the study from Robinheimer and Simpson looking at menopausal weight loss and menopausal weight gain?
Oh no, tell me about this.
They basically explain that in menopause, estrogen and FSH decrease, which leads to a loss of muscle mass, basically. So then people sense their loss of muscle mass, the body upregulates appetite for protein, and when we keep eating the same trashy low-protein foods, we gain body fat. So again, it's dialing back the fat and carbs and prioritizing protein. And we definitely see in our programs, it's not the athletes on a higher protein percentage diet. It's those middle-aged, older females that tend to thrive on the 40-50% protein diet, and everything falls into place, and it's really a beautiful thing, and they get really excited and have great success. But if they're prioritizing protein and nutrients, and the size of their plate is massive, but they put it into chronometer and it's like, oh, this is so few calories. I can't believe how full I feel on so much food, and it doesn't contain hardly any calories. That's the realization once you prioritize protein and nutrient density.
Yeah, and you're a fan of protein sparing modified fast, which is what I use in my Mondays Matter program. And you did a wonderful blog that really detailed out sort of the research behind it, which is, there is definitely some scientific sort of clinical trials, but a lot of it comes sort of from real world experiences as well.
And it's what works for the bodybuilding community,
and I like, and so we utilize it as almost a fasting mimicking approach, like the 5-2, but instead we have protein sparing days as opposed to just those low calorie days.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, because you're right. Like to do something like that day in, day out, like they did in the clinical trials. I mean, if you're not being monitored every day via, then it's very difficult to maintain. But also you're not being taught the habits and behaviours that will lead to sustainable fat loss. Yeah. How do you use it,
Yeah,
Marty?
definitely. I suppose, as I mentioned before, it's a very sharp, shiny, powerful tool that in the hands of people who don't understand what they're doing, which is most of us, it doesn't always end well if you try to chronically push to extremes. So what you're doing with the occasional day of PSMF is a great way to reset and get a fasting mimicking diet without losing your muscle mass, which is great. In our macros masterclass, we sort of say, what are you eating now? If you're eating 20% protein, let's try to treat that, maybe getting 100 grams of protein, treat that as a minimum, and then dial back your fat and carbs progressively week on week and develop new habits around your day-to-day food intake so that at the end you've transformed how you eat. So everything we do moves people towards the protein sparing modified fast, really high protein percentage, but it's a moving towards in that direction, just enough to get 0.5 to 1% weight loss per week. But if you get greater than 1% weight loss per week, Nutrient Optimiser will give you back calories and say, hey, slow down a little bit, Tiger. You're maybe pushing things a little bit fast and you may end up binging. Yeah. And that'd be sad. And we don't want you to undo all your great work with the donuts and peanut butter and pizza that you'll probably be gravitating to mindlessly to survive.
Are they your foods, Marty? You've mentioned them a number of times now.
Oh, peanut butter is my diabolical kryptonite. That I ask the family to hide from me if it's in the in the house. So
I like that what you've said there with that your system is able to guide people on adding back in calories, like Carbon Diet Coach that Lane Norton and Holly Baxter's app. Like, that's what I love about that app, is that if you are putting in the right data, then the data is correct and will help guide. And I think people can lose their intuition around food, satiety, hunger, all of it, and also how quickly or slowly weight loss and what's appropriate.
Yeah, tracking is really, really valuable. Most people hate it and not everybody does it, and that's why people love data-driven fasting that just uses the glucose meter to guide when and what you eat. But tracking your food for a few weeks is invaluable, and people just, like you said, they go, oh, I didn't realize how much fat I was. Oh my gosh, I thought these were free foods in keto. Potatoes are free foods in Weight Watchers. I mean, let's say in my world, asparagus, spinach, egg whites, shrimp, they might be the free foods because they're impossible to overeat.
So Marty, we've talked a lot about food, and I'd really love to finish up by talking about fasting and your data-driven fasting program, because I feel like you take a much more physiological approach to it than just being very structured around a certain time window. So can you sort of describe what is the program?
Yeah, it's just use your glucose as a fuel gauge, and rather than stressing about how much it rises after you eat and trying to flatline your blood sugar by adding peanut butter to your carbs or clothing your carbs with fat, or the latest fad on Instagram for achieving flatline blood sugar, the most important thing you can manage is your glucose before you eat next. So if your glucose is dropped below what's normal for you, then at that point you're legitimately hungry and you've started to tap into your stored body fat. It's like, Bonza, good work, you're legitimately hungry, have a good meal, time to eat again. And people typically get to eat 1, 2, 3 times a day depending on what they eat, and they quickly learn to think of how will this meal affect my glucose in not just 1 hour, 2 hours, but 3 or 4 or 5 hours before the next meal. And once they start to gamify that process and understand their body, they're able to sustainably use sort of a progressive overload approach with their glucose by chasing a lower pre-meal glucose trigger that enables them to lose weight without tracking their calories. So yeah, it's really, it was just an idea that was inspired by some work done at University of Otago about 5 years ago, when after a bulking phase when, you get big and strong and maybe put on a bit more fluff than you want to. I designed a spreadsheet and shared it on Facebook, and everybody loved it, and it blew up and changed my life. And I quit my job, and I just guide people to console them and guide them about their glucose all day. So yeah, it's a whole lot of fun and works really well, and there's a great little community around it.
Yeah, amazing. So when you say that your blood sugar would drop below normal, like in my head, my blood sugar drops below normal and I feel irritable, and I definitely notice those low blood sugar patterns. And I've got to say, there are these protein bars which are keto, which do it to me. And I had one yesterday, and I noticed it as well. I'm like, oh, I should not have just had that by itself.
Your blood sugar drops after you eat?
Yeah, so after about 2 hours, because I think it spikes as well, because I've seen it spike before in CGM. So to what level should people push it?
Well, just a little bit.
Okay.
Again, I'm all about just a little bit. And rather than going, the best fasting, if 24 doesn't work for you, go 22-2 and then alternate day. And why don't you fast a whole week? And then what do you eat at the end of that week? What do people eat? They're so hungry. Yeah. It's
not egg whites and shrimp.
No, exactly. And they're refeeding on keto, and which is just high fat bombs potentially, or whatever. It's going to be the most energy dense food that they feel they've earned. At least that's my experience when I was doing the extended fasting. But data-driven fasting guides you to, in the first 3 days, you get your average pre-meal glucose before you eat normally over 3 days. And then after that, for 5 days, all you have to do is get just below that. And you go, good work, time to eat.
Okay, I get that.
You've actually got just below it. And then if you successfully get below that on a regular basis, your pre-meal trigger will continue to drop progressively, like a progressive overload program for your body for 4 weeks. And then at the end of 4 weeks, you go, that's enough. Take a break for a few weeks. You can come back and start again. And it's like a progressive overload program in the gym, progressive overload for your metabolism. And similarly, interesting, you talked about protein dropping your blood sugar. Most people find in the morning when their blood sugar is high, they can have a protein-focused meal and it'll actually drop their blood sugar and they can eat again sooner.
So it isn't the protein in there that drops my blood, or spikes and drops it. It's the fibre they use to make it a low-carb keto bar.
Yeah. Yeah, which might be why it spikes. A lot of people find their blood sugar on a processed keto, high protein, whatever you want to call it, processed bars. Delicious. We've got those Musashi bars here. That's my other kryptonite. Yes. The cookies and cream. It's like, it's high protein. It's 40% protein, but I just ate 5. Wait up.
Our good friend, Professor Grant Schofield, also shared his experience with me about those Musashi bars a couple of weeks ago. Similar thing. Yeah. He's like, they're great. They've got 40 grams of protein, but we can't buy any more.
And the cookies and cream protein powder. Yes. I can just keep chowing down on that forever. That's dangerous stuff. Job. Just because it's so hyper palatable. It's great for marketing, but whole food is definitely better
for sure
if you want to get real satiety and real nutrients. Anyway, it just gamifies DDF. Just gamifies the lowering of your blood sugar process and teaches you to reflect on, how did that meal influence my blood sugar? Do I need to prioritize protein, dial back carbs, dial back fat, without necessarily tracking your food? And then people can do the macros masterclass if they want to quantify it a little bit more, if they get fascinated by it. Yeah,
nice. And to do DDF, do you need a CGM or are you okay with a glucometer?
Yeah, actually a standard glucometer is not only a whole lot cheaper, especially outside America, it's much more accurate. So accuracy is important for DDF, and blood glucose is, the CGMs measure interstitial fluid, which is a different compartment in the body and potentially lagging and not as accurate and can be more affected by exercise. And the different companies in the States have staff doctors that prescribe a CGM, so it's covered by healthcare and they just charge for their app. But the rest of the world, unfortunately, doesn't have that perk or a loophole that, so a normal glucometer is perfect and even better. So yeah, we use the Contour Next One glucometer, which is super cool.
So Marty, a couple of questions just to finish up. One, What do you eat? How often do you eat?
2 or 3 times a day. And I'm generally
Musashi bars and peanut
riding
butter.
my bike and
Sorry.
what did I have? Had some yogurt and protein powder, but not the Musashi dangerous stuff before, because my blood sugar was a little bit low. My wife makes these amazing salads that I put tinned fish on, and then she'll make amazing dinners that are low carb and yummy, and plenty of veggies. We have lots of kangaroo here, which is what I go for if I'm looking for a high protein, nutritious food. Eggs for snacks, they're great. Sometimes if I'm trying to lose weight, I'll give a couple of the yolks to the dog who loves them. So.
Nice. And and one question which I forgot to ask at the time when we were talking about potatoes. Do you have any idea on what that cooked and cooled potato does to blood sugar, but also the calories available? Like, I've looked for information and haven't found any.
There's been a lot of talk about resistant starch, but I haven't seen that much hard data. So usually people go, I tried the cooked and cooled potato, but my blood sugar was still a mess and spiked. So I don't see a lot of people going, I'm getting 0 blood sugar response from a cooked and cooled potato.
I think that's what we need to do, is run a study and actually just enroll people to the potato diet. Let's see what actually happens. You've got the spreadsheet. Surely you can write a spreadsheet about that.
But a potato is a great hack if your blood sugars are really low, to just boost your blood sugar back up with some starchy carbs. Totally. And it just smashes your hunger. So then when you go to actually eat your meal, you're not ravenous and going to overeat. But again, obviously potato plus seed oils plus salts equals, yummy chips. So that's where you get into trouble with the carb-fat combo together that we're all chowing down on. Super delicious.
Especially if you team it with like ketchup and a craft beer. That's like danger. Not that I would know. Of course I would, because I love it.
You're off to the pub after the interview.
Yeah, I know, it's great. Marty, look, thank you so much for your time. And I would love to chat. You've got so much information on your website, which is just freely available. And for people who are super interested in understanding their metabolism and food and how it impacts it, like, you've just provided so much value. And your programs are just equally very good value for what you're able to provide. So can you just let people know where to find them?
Yeah, optimizingnutrition.com is the blog. I just keep on having random thoughts and trying to put numbers behind it and write a blurb to try and explain it. So optimizingnutrition.com, and if you search for Optimizing Nutrition, we've got a YouTube channel and Twitter and Instagram and a whole lot of stuff on Facebook. And then if you search for Data-Driven Fasting is our most popular program that just uses your glucose as a fuel gauge. We've got a great community that's built up around that, and then we've got a macros masterclass and a micros masterclass if you want to track your food for a few weeks and dial in your macros and micros to align with your goals.
That's awesome. You're not on TikTok?
No, life's too short for TikTok.
Kind of times, Marty.
I'm going to get some Instagram advice from you, because that does my head in. I just want to write stuff, not be performing on social media. No,
I get it. And you write very well, so thankfully you can stick to the stuff you're good at. Not that you wouldn't be good at TikTok, I'm sure, but
I'm sure I could do a little shake or something. I don't know. Maybe I think my wife said you can post gym selfies or be married, so I'm pretty sure the same would apply to me being on TikTok.
That's brilliant. That's great. Hey, thanks so much, Marty, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Hey, thanks so much, Mikki. Great to chat. Really enjoyed it.
All right, team. Hopefully you really got a lot from that, and I just love listening to Marty talk about what he does. I've heard him on a number of other podcasts, and I'm super excited to meet him in person over at Low Carb Denver. Speaking of Low Carb Denver, Next week on the podcast, I speak to Dr. Jeffrey Gerber, a family physician and Denver's diet doctor, about his work in both individualizing diet based on a person's insulin sensitivity, but also in his role within the community, helping spread education and information around the power of diet to help with wellness and longevity. So Jeffrey started in low carbohydrate diets and has expanded this through creating low carb conferences, including the Low Carb Denver, which is coming up at the end of February. And look, it is just such a great conversation, and I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation I have with Jeffrey. All right, team. Until then, though, you can catch me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, over on Instagram and Twitter at Mikki Williden, or over on my website, mikkiwilliden.com, where you can sign up to any number of my programs, including Real Food Nutrition, the Keto Longevity Plan, Flow Fat Loss Plan for Women, or the Man Plan, or sign up to the Mondays Matter waitlist. That is coming up fast for Mondays Matter Shreduary edition. And that is all over on mikkiwilliden.com. All right, team, you have a fabulous week. Talk soon.